So let me ask you something. When a leader blocks someone's growth, what's really going on? And before you think about that leader over there, I want you to think about you for a moment. Is it a personal vendetta or is it a default response learned from something that they experienced themselves? Let's talk about it. Welcome to Crossroads and Catalysts. I'm your host, Shanita B. This is where we explore how a thoughtful, wise, and strategic perspective at life's crossroads can become the catalyst for meaningful change in your leadership and life's direction. So, blocking someone's growth is dirty work, regardless of intent. It's generally easier to identify it when it happens to someone else or when it happens to you. But what about when you're the one that's doing it? Do you know when you're the hurdle that someone has to jump to succeed? And it's quite possible that that may be the case. And before we jump into this episode, I want to help you succeed. So make sure that you hit the follow button and share it with at least one person. So we know that there are innumerable reasons why leaders block others' growth. And sometimes it's very subtle, okay? You're either blocking access, you're withholding connections, or maybe you're just giving some very vague feedback, or you're just flat out withholding any and all support. But these are the kind of things that can break people's confidence because without honest feedback, they're left to believe that the issue is solely them when that might not actually be the case. But because they're not receiving transparent and honest information, they don't really know where they stand. And just like you, they have thoughts and considerations and feelings about what is going on. And sometimes they're just not always clear. And this reminds me of one of the clients that I was working with. And she was wanting to learn other aspects of the operations because she really wasn't satisfied with the growth of where she was. And the scope of her work had been changed over several months. And she just recognized that, look, it's just time for me to do something different. And so there were opportunities that were becoming available in other departments. But what she did was she expressed concerns that her boss was undermining her attempts to hire into other departments. So for months, she struggled in several ways. Okay, she was trying to get an audience with her boss and she was asking for feedback, only to be met with these broad and unspecific statements. You know, the kind like, you just need to work on your analytical skills or you need to develop your Excel skills. And that was kind of difficult for her to do because the scope of the work had changed and it completely eliminated the need for Excel. So there she was with no real insight and no path forward. All she had was confusion, and slowly she was losing her confidence. So, this was in addition to the fact that she learned that her boss stated that she would only give a recommendation if she left the company. So, let me get this straight. You're good enough to stay, but not good enough to grow. This is the nerve of people because this is a real life thing and this kind of thing happens more often than we hear about. Now, and I've worked with some characters, but I've not yet met anyone who I at least thought that I would not even give them an opportunity to grow somewhere else because maybe where they're working is just not the right fit for them after all. And that happens. Okay. I've experienced it. You've probably experienced it. But at some point, shouldn't you ask yourself what is driving this? Because it is really easy to tell somebody that they're not ready. Okay. Because it really does. It sounds very harmless, but it is rarely received that way. And then you also have to consider how is this internalized by the recipient? And let me tell you how it's internalized because quite a few people think that once they hear something like that, well, I'm just not capable or I knew that I couldn't do it. So what was the point of me even moving forward because I knew I wasn't going to make it. So I want you to think about that because I know that you've been in a situation like that to where you have felt like you did not have any confidence and the person who you reported to just did not seem to understand that all they had to do was just offer a little bit of support. And so they undermined you, they undermined your confidence. And what we do and say to people can shape someone's growth and trajectory for years to come. And I want you to sit with that because these are the implications of our actions. And I don't want you to get me wrong, okay? This is definitely a two-way street. Sometimes people are just not ready, okay? But you need to be sure that the conditions for readiness are clear and specific and that they're not subjected to your whims. You don't want someone's career or other dreams that they have to be thwarted because you were in a bad mood and you stayed in a bad mood day after day for weeks, for months. This is my point. All right. So let's get back to that question that I asked earlier. Is this a personal vendetta or is it a learned response? Because there could definitely be other reasons, but for the sake of time, we're going to focus on these two things. And I want us to look at the context because context is always important. And notwithstanding any character issues, insecurity, I think, plays a major role. And this could definitely be an issue. And if you're unsure about your own abilities, you could be projecting this onto your team without even realizing it. And this is one of the reasons why I say that self awareness is so important. You have to be able to assess your own responses, your own behaviors, your own thoughts about uh, others and how you're engaging with others so that you can figure out how you are being perceived. Of course, this does not mean that you're going to get it 100% of the time, but the fact that you are focusing on how you're perceived by other people, it will help you to make the appropriate adjustments. The goal is not to satisfy 100% of the people because that's never going to happen. The goal is not to prevent hurting people. And I want you to hear me in context because sometimes when you tell the truth to people, when you are honest with people and you give them the feedback that they need to help them grow, it will hurt. Sometimes it will hurt. But the intention is part of what matters, and how you deliver it is also part of what matters. Okay, so we've talked about insecurity, and I also want to make sure that I say this because, like I mentioned earlier, all of us have been in a situation where we did not feel completely confident. And when we lack confidence, then we become insecure because we're no longer steady, we're no longer stable. And sometimes we develop this imposter syndrome as if we don't belong, as if we're incapable and we're incompetent. This is not the case. But when you take upon yourself to erode someone's confidence, again, doesn't matter if you're intentional about that, if you're doing it on purpose, it can still have the same impact. And that is what is ultimately important. And another thing that I think should be mentioned in this context is sometimes we're in positions that are outsized for us. It's not a good fit. And so, of course, this does also speak into the insecurity because if you're in a position that is outsized for you, you're doing everything that you can to hold on to the people who are there who might know more information about a particular thing than you do. They might have more institutional knowledge than you do. There are a host of things that could fall into that category. But these are the kinds of things that would prevent us from actually being a help to someone and hurting them. And we don't want to do that. And then another thing that could be the reason as to why we're doing this is because maybe you were treated in a similar way by a former boss. And sometimes we become the very thing that we dislike. And you see this in other situations where people will take on sometimes the worst characteristics of a person and they will start to behave and express themselves in that way. And it's not conducive and it's not helpful to anyone in that situation. And this is one of those things that we really do. We have to be aware of it because I've seen it over and over. I've seen it in the places where I have worked, where people have gone after promotional positions only to be told, well, you just don't know enough or you're just not there yet. And you can only say that to people so many times before they start to take it personally. And most people do not do not easily cast off those types of experiences. Again, because sometimes if you as the boss are saying that because you don't want them to leave, well then who are you looking out for? Because it's not the team member. You're looking out for yourself. And if you think that this only shows up at work, it doesn't. Okay? Blocking growth shows up outside the office too. And so those same inclinations that you have at work are the same ones that you brought from home. And it may be a little easier to cover them while you're at work. And this is why I kind of chuckle to myself when things happen, uh, you know, outside of work, and it could be something that's not really worthy of mentioning in a good way. But when people find out about it at work, sometimes they're shocked and sometimes they're like, yeah, I knew that they were capable of that. Of course, and don't get me wrong, that's an extreme. I get it. But the point is the same. Is you're the same person when you show up. You just have the ability and you have more of an incentive to restrain certain qualities and characteristics about yourself. Okay? That is my point. And so when these inclinations show up at home, it could sound a little bit like this. Okay. Say that there's a scenario where a friend or a partner shares a dream or an idea with you, and your response is, well, I mean, that's unrealistic. Or rather than offering them some ideas on how it could work, you start to chip away and give them a hundred statements on why it won't work. And so as I was thinking about this, it reminded me of some of the work that I've done in former organizations and how we would joke about being in the position to be dream killers. And so I want you to hear me clearly, okay? This was not over people's jobs. This was not being the dream killer to prevent people from moving into different positions or to promote them. We were working on projects, and our job literally was to review these ideas that were submitted to us and to tell them why they would not work. That was our job. So I definitely did not have a desire to reduce someone and limit them only to where they were in a particular position. Not at all my desire. But you know what else it reminded me of as I was thinking through and preparing this episode? It reminded me of me. It reminded me of myself and my relationship with my daughter. Because when you have children, when you have people who you love and you have a certain idea in mind as to what success looks like for them, it is easy to fall into a trap and think that everything that you're saying to them is for their good and that it is helping them. And sometimes that is not the case. Because as I thought about this episode, I thought about some of the things that I might have said to my daughter that really did not help to support her and encourage her. And of course, there were some different things that were going on. I can make excuse after excuse as to why what I said was appropriate and why it was helpful, when in reality, sometimes I said things to my daughter that were not helpful, they were hurtful. Okay. Growth can be uncomfortable, and it's not always just uncomfortable for the person who is doing the growing. It is difficult for the people who are connected to that growth in any capacity. And this is why I want you to consider this. Okay. I want you to ask yourself, have I ever discouraged someone's growth because it disrupted my comfort? And they don't call it growing pains for nothing, because again, There are so many people who are going to be impacted because they are connected to the growth in some way. So, where might you be doing this without realizing it? And I want you to really consider this. As a leader, your goal should be to create the conditions for growth and success. And anything else is control cosplaying as leadership. And there it is. And so, as we close this episode out, I just want to give you a heads up that I'm going to be hosting a virtual workshop in June, and I want you to be a part of it. So be sure to check out the link in the show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the Catalyst, which is my newsletter. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you a short weekly reflection for you to consider as you continue on your journey. All right. So we have reached the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, be thoughtful, be wise, be strategic, and remember, crossroads reveal who you are. Catalysts shape who you become. Every decision matters. So make it count. I'll talk to you next week.